multiculturalism, then what? And the second half of that is normative contestation and competing approaches to the governance of immigrant diversity. So the central questions of my thesis were, has there been a retreat from multiculturalism and its underlying norms in Canada? And that I was interested in the broader question of, are we taking a step back from multiculturalism? And if so, what is being advanced as a replacement for it? And my underlying concern is, what role will these alternatives give to the human rights norms that are really at the root of that multicultural approach? So to take a step back, I want to say a little bit about how I approach this question, because when I say multiculturalism, it's typically understood in many different ways. It can be seen as a theoretical idea, or as a particular policy approach, or even as a general concept or a general idea. So I defined it in a particular way. And I brought way too many notes today. I talked about multiculturalism specifically with respect to immigrant diversity because I found that these debates about our possible retreat from multiculturalism had to do specifically with immigrants. And I looked at multiculturalism as a particular model or approach to governing immigrant ethnocultural diversity. And my concern was with the normative foundations of this approach. So the human rights concerns at the basis of this normative, the normative foundation of this approach. So by the multicultural approach, I meant an approach to governing ethnocultural diversity that departs from previous ways of conceptualizing state-minority relations, but also national unity and identity. So multiculturalism was a different way of looking at how to approach this question of how to deal with cultural diversity, ethnocultural diversity in a population. So it's different from previous approaches, but it goes, a multicultural approach specifically goes beyond just tolerating ethnocultural diversity and involves protecting equality in a way that goes beyond a different defined manner by extending public recognition and support for minority ethnocultural identities, not only in material ways, but in symbolic ways as well. And this is really important when it comes to multiculturalism as a different way of understanding national identity, as something that can include diversity. So the normative foundation of this particular multicultural approach, in my thesis, I defined it in this way. It includes three different parts. Number one, rejecting these older ways of governing diversity, which relied on assimilation, exclusion, and marginalization of those who were not part of the dominant racial or ethnocultural group. Number two, it involved respecting the principles of the protection of equality, culture, and freedom of religion, which are based on these important human rights to these principles. And third, it involved conceiving of national identity as something that could include ethnocultural diversity. So just kind of skip forward to my conclusions, I found that there has been something of a retreat in these two countries, but only at the national level of governance. So I used a multi-level governance approach. And when I looked at, for example, in Canada, the federal level, I did find some evidence of a retreat from this particular approach. But when I looked to other levels, the sub-state level and the supra-state level, meaning different regional and international organizations, I didn't find the same trend. Instead, what I found was a contestation between two different alternative approaches. So the cities that I looked at in each country, in the Netherlands I looked at the city of Utrecht, and in Canada I looked at Mississauga. In terms of super-state bodies, I looked at initiatives of the UN, the European Union, and the Council of Europe. So instead of a clear retreat, these results suggest that two competing approaches are being pursued. One I call the social cohesion approach, which is what I found at the national level, and the other one I call the intercultural approach. And this is what I found at the sub- and supra-state levels. So the social cohesion approach essentially meant a return to a stress on social cohesion around values that were defined by the majority. A move away from the public recognition and accommodation of minority ethnocultural groups. And a trend towards going back to a one-way approach to integration. In other words, it was almost entirely or entirely the responsibility of immigrants to engage in the integration process. What I found at the city level and at the international level was a push to resist this retreat from these multicultural norms and emphasize some aspects of multiculturalism that were not emphasized as much in previous policy incarnations of multiculturalism. So there was a renewed effort to interpret these norms as relevant specifically to facilitate the immigrant integration process. And as is implied by the name, there was a real stress on intercultural understanding and intercultural dialogue. So there was a really important role maintained for cultural sensitivity and cultural competence, and a really important role for the receiving community in this process of integration. So I'm going to go very quickly through the rest of the presentation. In terms of my methodology, I used a case studies approach, which I already mentioned. I looked at these two countries, one city in each country, and then some international organizations that were relevant to these countries. I also used semi-structured interviews with about 20 people in each country and looked at relevant policy documents. And I can't get into too much of the empirical examples, but for example, the integration program that was just discussed was preceded by the 1983 ethnic minorities policy, which was essentially the multiculturalism policy in the Netherlands. And it's important to note that this policy was scrapped and replaced with the integration program, first in the 1990s, and then another wave of this legislation came about in the early 2000s. Thank you. So there was a distinct shift away from a multicultural approach to this integration process. But what I found at the city level was that there was a really different approach. So instead of moving away from multiculturalism and instead of moving towards this more one-way process of integration, the cities were using their implementation role in this program to maintain some of those multicultural norms. So they would provide complementary bridging programs to help immigrants make it through this process. It was mentioned that there was not a lot of funding actually for immigrants to go through this process, which you do have to pay for. And sometimes the cities would use their budgets to pay immigrants to go through the process. And there's one interesting example of a women's integration class that provoked a debate between the two different levels of government, because there was a specific class offered for women who were not comfortable for cultural or religious reasons interacting with men. So this class was offered specifically for women, and the representative of the national government responsible for integration said, you can't do that, that offends our Dutch values. And the local alderman said, we need to maintain this in order to actually go through the integration process. It's important to make some accommodations to help along the way. So the result was that the courses were maintained in an informal way. There were no women's classes on the books, but they were informally grouped together in these classes. So I'll give you a couple representative quotes, although I probably should skip through this because we're getting close to time. So in terms of Canada, I won't spend as much time because we're probably more familiar with this case. There's obviously less drastic change at the national level because we still do have our Multiculturalism Act. It's still institutionalized in our Constitution. The main area where I see a change is policy evolution since the formation of the Multiculturalism Program. So whereas the original policy goals of the Multiculturalism Program included things like assisting cultural groups to retain and foster their identity, and assisting cultural groups to overcome barriers to their full participation in Canadian society. The current policy objectives of the program are now heavily focused on social cohesion and integration. So what this means is that, for example, any funding for projects through the Multiculturalism Program specifically exclude any kind of project that are focused on celebrating a particular ethnocultural or religious group and must include some sort of integration goal. So there must be more than one group and they must be focused on integration rather than celebrating and maintaining cultural diversity. And what I saw again at the city level was a real massive increase in projects to increase cultural sensitivity and to foster this two-way process. So there was an increase in the exact same